Israel's leadership is facing renewed scrutiny as the country weighs the risk of another confrontation with Iran, and as the Prime Minister's long-running corruption case once again slows down, this time under the shadow of security claims tied to regional escalation. In recent days, questions have resurfaced inside Israel over whether Iran's missile capability has truly been degraded after weeks of strikes and counterstrikes, and whether decision-makers are bracing for a new wave of attacks rather than celebrating a decisive turning point. Critics have sharpened their attacks on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, accusing him of retreating into what they describe as bunker politics, arguing that he is avoiding public exposure and political accountability while the Iran threat dominates the agenda. Those political accusations are now colliding with a legal reality. Netanyahu has formally asked the court to delay the next phase of his testimony in the corruption trial that has followed. At him for years and has repeatedly been interrupted by national crises. His testimony had been due to resume in April, but his legal team says security demands linked to the Iran situation make it impossible for him to appear for now. In a filing to the Jerusalem District Court, Netanyahu's lawyers asked to postpone his scheduled court appearance and said he would be unavailable for at least 2 more weeks. The filing framed the request as a matter of national urgency rather than personal convenience, citing sensitive considerations. In the court document, he said due to classified security and diplomatic reasons connected to the dramatic events that have taken place in the state of Israel and throughout the Middle East in recent times, the Prime Minister will not be able to testify in a proceeding for at least the next 2 weeks. Its defense has also provided additional material to the court, describing it as sensitive and tied to diplomatic and security matters. The court is expected to weigh the request only after it receives and reviews the prosecution's response. The timing is politically explosive. Emergency measures imposed during the recent war period have been lifted, and proceedings have been expected to move forward again. Even with Netanyahu seeking a delay, defense lawyers have signaled they are prepared to continue hearing testimony from a prosecution witness, an indication that, at least from one side, the case can still progress even if the Prime Minister is not on the stand immediately. Netanyahu, for his part, continues to deny the allegations. He has repeatedly rejected accusations of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust charges filed in 2019 after years of investigation. The case remains unprecedented in Israel's political history. Netanyahu is the first sitting Israeli prime minister to be charged with criminal offenses while still in office. The trial began in 2020, and it has dragged on through repeated delays tied to his official rest pay, instabilities, coalition instability, elections, and now war. For many Israelis, the question is no longer simply whether the legal process will reach a conclusion, but whether the country's political system can function normally while the leader at the center of a major criminal trial also claims to be indispensable during a period of escalating regional danger. That tension has only deepened amid continuing fallout from the Hamas-led attacks and the war that followed, and amid a broader regional escalation that has increasingly included Iran. Netanyahu's critics argue that he has mishandled the crisis and then used the crisis to postpone accountability, both political and legal. His supporters counter that Israel is facing an extraordinary security environment and that the prime minister's schedule is dictated by events beyond any courtroom calendar. The atmosphere has been further clouded by personal tragedy and public shock connected to the judiciary. Judge Benny Sagi, a senior Israeli jurist associated with the wider corruption proceedings surrounding Netanyahu, was killed in January in a traffic incident when a vehicle struck his motorcycle on Route 6. The death added to a sense of turmoil around a case that has already been a lightning rod for protest, political division, and public distrust. Meanwhile, polling has suggested the governing coalition could be in trouble if elections were held soon, with signs of public anger hardening rather than fading. While Israeli politics has repeatedly defied prediction, the trend lines have fueled speculation about whether Netanyahu's grip on power is weakening or whether the security situation will once again reshape the political landscape before voters ever get the chance to weigh in. All of this is unfolding against a wider argument that has moved beyond Israel's courtroom drama and into the strategic debate over Iran's true military capacity, especially its missile arsenal. In the United States, political leaders have presented a confident narrative about the results of military action against Iran. President Donald Trump has declared that Washington achieved its objectives and could halt bombing from what he described as a position of strength. Administration officials have described the operation in sweeping terms, asserting that Iran's military has been severely degraded. Trump framed the moment as a breakthrough, suggesting Tehran was eager to stop. He said Iran begged for this ceasefire, and we all know it. He also cast the pause in fighting as a global turning point. Asterisk, he said, as a President Truth this morning, a big day for world peace. Iran wants it to happen. They've had enough. As Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth echoed that message, describing the operation as a decisive win that would shake Iran's capabilities. For years, actress, he said, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield, a capital V military victory. By any measure, Epic Fury D. I made it Iran's military and rendered it combat ineffective for years to come. Asked her, analysis is challenging the assumptions behind Western estimates of Iran's missile stockpile, arguing that the numbers often cited in public discussions may dramatically understate what Iran has built over decades. A Brazil-based analyst, Patricia Marins, has argued that many Western counts ignore the scale of Iran's serial production and the breadth of its missile industry. In her assessment, the idea that Iran entered the latest conflict with only a few thousand missiles does not align with the timeline of Iran's manufacturing efforts, the number of missile types it has produced, or the way older systems have been modernized rather than discarded. Marins has estimated that during the 1-2-day conflict last year, Iran's stockpile could have been closer to 20,000 missiles rather than the few thousand sometimes referenced in Western think tank estimates. Her breakdown suggested roughly 7,000 to 8,000 ballistic missiles and 12,000 to 13,000 cruise missiles in different roles, including both operational missiles and large reserve holdings dispersed across the country. Her argument rests heavily on industrial history. She points to Iran's production of Shahab, 2 missiles beginning in the early 1990s, saying production continued for roughly 15 years. She then describes Shahab 3 production as running from around 2004 to 2008 before it was overtaken by newer and longer-range systems. She also highlights a shift that she argues is crucial. In 2015, Iran began a major program to upgrade guidance systems on older missiles. In her view, this meant older missiles were not simply scrapped, but modernized and moved into reserve stockpiles, expanding the overall inventory rather than shrinking it. Marins further argues that by around 2010, Iran had reached a point where it was producing about a dozen different ballistic and cruise missile models at the same time. The point, she says, is not only the variety of systems, but the industrial structure behind them, parallel production lines that can keep output steady even when a single model is replaced or upgraded. After 2015, she says, Iran continued producing at various times between 8 and 12 missile types with ranges above 1,000 kilometers. She points to long-range cruise missiles such as Sumar and Meshkat, believed to exceed 2,000 kilometers, and to solid fuel systems such as Imad and Sejel that also reach beyond 2,000 kilometers. The strategic implication, in her view, is that Iran can strike across the region without relying on manned aircraft, using standoff weapons launched from deep inside its territory. Marins rejects what she calls low estimates, such as a claim that Iran had only about 2,500 missiles at the start of the war, arguing those figures don't match decades of manufacturing and the scale of Iran's defense industrial ecosystem. She argues that even conservative assumptions about production rates lead to a much larger number. In one of her key statements, she laid out the basis of her calculation. Patricia Marins said, if we assume a conservative average production rate of roughly 100 units per model per year, taking into account multiple parallel production lines, that alone would give Iran over the last 15 years an arsenal exceeding 17,000 missiles. There is simply no logic in claiming that Iran, after more than 30 years of dedicated missile production with multiple active lines, had only 2,500 missiles in stockpile as of February, as many Western think tanks claim. These estimates consistently understate Iran's real industrial capacity. She also argues that Iran's missile effort is not the work of a single isolated military program, but an ecosystem involving hundreds of companies. In her view, the scale of that industrial base makes it even less plausible that Iran's missile inventory would be as limited as some public estimates as of August. This debate over numbers is non-academic. If Iran's stockpile is far larger than widely believed, then the strategic picture changes for everyone involved: for Israel, which must plan missile defense and deterrence; for the United States, which must judge whether its strikes achieve lasting effects; and for Gulf states and others in the region, which must assess the risk to bases, infrastructure, and cities within range. And inside Israel, where missile defense has become a daily reality during periods of escalation, the question of what Iran still has, what it can still launch, and how quickly it can replenish feeds directly into the political storm around Netanyahu. His opponents argue that a leader facing serious criminal charges should not be able to repeatedly delay testimony by pointing to security crises, especially when those crises are also the subject of fierce political dispute. They claim that the prime minister is using the Iran confrontation and broader regional instability as a shield, both physically and politically, while the legal process stalls. His allies argue the opposite, that the prime minister's role in managing sensitive security and diplomatic matters is precisely why the court should accommodate him, particularly during a period when Israel's decisions could shape the region for years. The court's response to the delay request will be closely watched, not only for what it means for the pace of the trial, but for what it signals about the balance between national security claims and the principle that even the most powerful elected officials must face the justice system on schedule. At the same time, the wider strategic uncertainty remains unresolved. If Iran's missile arsenal has survived weeks of strikes more intact than many expected, and if Tehran's leadership feels emboldened rather than weakened, then the region may be entering a new phase, one where the next attack is not a hypothetical, but a looming possibility that leads. Errors must plan for in real time. And that is the backdrop to everything now unfolding in Jerusalem. A prime minister trying to postpone a defining legal moment, a public divided over whether he is acting out of necessity or self-preservation, and a region where the next escalation could arrive with little warning. The court delay request is landing in a political atmosphere already charged with anxiety about what Iran can still do and what Israel can still absorb. After weeks of strikes and counterstrikes, the central question inside Israel is no longer only what was hit, but what survived. The focus has shifted to Iran's missile force, how much of it remains intact, how quickly it can regenerate, and whether the next wave, if it comes, could look different from the last. Even among those who supported the campaign, there is growing recognition that missile wars rarely end with a single dramatic turning point. They end with exhaustion, deterrence, or a pause that both sides use to reload. That uncertainty is feeding a second parallel argument whether Israel's leadership is projecting confidence or quietly preparing the public for the possibility that the most dangerous phase may not be over. Critics have framed the prime minister's posture as defensive and insular, accusing him of governing from behind layers of security while asking the public to accept prolonged risk. Supporters counter that this is exactly what leadership looks like in a regional, crisis-less spectacle, more closed-door decision-making. But the legal system does not pause simply because the strategic picture is complicated. It pauses only when judges accept that it must. In his latest filing, the prime minister's legal team is asking the Jerusalem District Court to delay the next stage of his testimony in the corruption case that has shadowed him for years. The request is explicit in its reasoning and broad in its implications. In the court document, he said, due to classified security and diplomatic reasons connected to the dramatic events that have taken place in the state of Israel and throughout the Middle East in recent times, the prime minister will not be able to testify at a proceeding for at least the next 2 weeks. Absolutely, that line is doing more than asking for time. It is effectively asking the court to accept that the security situation is not merely a backdrop, but an active constraint on the country's political leadership, even when the matter before the court is a criminal prosecution of that leadership. The court will weigh the request against the prosecution's response and against the principle that no public official is above the normal pace of justice. Yet the reality of Israeli politics is that the trial schedule has repeatedly collided with national emergencies, producing a pattern. Legal momentum builds, a crisis erupts, proceedings slow, public anger spikes, and then the cycle restarts. What makes the current moment different is that the security justification is tied to Iran, an adversary that by Israel's own assessment is not a one-off challenge, but a long-term strategic threat with multiple levers, missiles, drones, proxies, and diplomatic escalation. When the reason given is classified security and diplomatic needs, it is hard for outsiders to test the claim, and it is hard for the court to reject it without appearing to underestimate the stakes. That is why this delay request is being read as both legal maneuver and political signal. The signal to supporters is that the prime minister is indispensable during a volatile period. The signal to critics is that national security is once again being used as a shield against accountability. At the same time, the security debate has widened beyond Israel's borders, especially after sweeping claims from Washington about what recent military action achieved. In the United States, the message from the top has been triumphal. That bombing achieved its objectives, that ends military has been pushed back for years, and that the balance of power has shifted decisively. One of the most quoted lines came directly from the American president, who presented the ceasefire as proof of dominance rather than a negotiated pause. He said, Iran begged for this ceasefire, and we all know it. Asterisk, he said, as a President Truth this morning, a big day for world peace. Iran wants it to happen. They've had enough. That asterisk from the U.S. defense leadership. The rhetoric went further, describing the campaign as not just successful, but transformative. Asterisk, he said, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. A capital V military victory. By any measure, Epic Fury decimated Iran's military and rendered it combat ineffective for years to come. Those are maximal claims, and maximal claims invite maximal scrutiny. The key question is whether combat ineffective desk reference ibes Iran's real condition, or whether it is a political description meant to close the story quickly and cleanly. Because Iran's ability to threaten the region is not measured only in aircraft and bases. It is measured in inventory, dispersion, and production capacity, especially missiles. And on that subject, a competing narrative is gaining traction that Iran's missile stockpile has been consistently underestimated in Western public estimates, and that even significant strikes may have reduced only a fraction of what exists. That argument is being advanced most aggressively by analysts who focus on industrial capacity rather than visible launch events. Their contention is straightforward. If a country has been producing missiles for decades across multiple models with parallel production lines, then low stockpile estimates are hard to reconcile with basic arithmetic. One of the sharpest critiques targets the popular notion that Iran entered the conflict with only a few thousand missiles. The alternative estimate is far larger, tens of thousands when counting ballistic and cruise missiles together, including operational weapons and reserves. The logic behind the higher estimate rests on three pillars. First, longevity. Iran's missile program did not begin recently. It has had decades to build, test, refine, and mass produce. Even if production rates fluctuated, the cumulative effect over 20 to 30 years is enormous. Second, variety. The claim is not that Iran built one missile in huge numbers. It is that Iran built many missiles in meaningful numbers. Shorter range systems for regional targets, longer range systems for deterrence, and cruise missiles designed to complicate air defense planning. Variety matters because it implies multiple production lines and multiple supply chains, which makes the system harder to cripple in a single campaign. Third, survivability. Iran's missile force is designed to be dispersed. Storage depots, underground facilities, MOBI, Lee launchers, and decoys are part of the architecture. Even when strikes are successful, they may destroy infrastructure without destroying the bulk of the inventory. And even when inventory is reduced, the remaining force may still be large enough to sustain repeated salvos. Within that framework, the most consequential question becomes, what is the true size of Iran's reserve? Because wars of attrition are decided not by the first wave, but by what remains after the first wave is absorbed. The analyst at the center of this alternative estimate argues that Western think tanks have repeatedly lowballed Iran's holdings by focusing on what can be counted publicly, parades, test launches, and confirmed battlefield use, rather than what can be inferred from industrial output over time. Her estimate places Iran's arsenal at well over 17,000 missiles on a conservative calculation, and potentially closer to 20,000 when including both ballistic and cruise systems. She argues that the gap between a few thousand and tens of thousands is not a minor technical dispute. It changes the strategic picture. A stockpile of 2,500 missiles suggests a force that can be significantly degraded in a short war. A stockpile above 17,000 suggests a force that can absorb losses, sustain pressure, and still hold enough in reserve to deter escalation or punish it. And she does not present her argument as speculation. She presents it as the only conclusion that fits decades of production and modernization. In her words, asterisk Patricia Murin said, if we assume a conservative average production rate of roughly 100 units per model per year, taking into account multiple parallel production lines, that alone would give Iran over the last 15 years an arsenal exceeding 17,000 missiles. There is simply no logic in claiming that Iran, after more than 30 years of dedicated missile production with multiple active lines, had only 2,500 missiles in stockpile as of February, as many Western think tanks claimed aim. These estimates consistently understate Iran's real industrial capacity. Asterisk, if that assessment is even partially correct, it leads to uncomfortable implications for Israel's strategic planning. It would mean that weeks of strikes may have hit launch sites, command nodes, and air defense assets, but still left the deep magazine intact. It would mean that Iran's ability to stage another round is not limited to what it can produce next month, but what it already has stored across a dispersed network. And it would mean that deterrence cannot rely on the assumption that Iran is running out. It also changes how one interprets the political behavior in Jerusalem. If intelligence assessments suggest that Iran retains significant capability, then caution in public appearances may not be political theater. It may be standard security posture. And if the leadership believes another strike is plausible, the instinct to prioritize classified briefings over courtroom testimony becomes easier. To justify, even if it remains controversial, still, the domestic political cost is real. Every trial delay deepens the perception that the legal process bends around one individual. Every security-based postponement invites critics to say the system is being gamed. And every day the case drags on, it becomes less about the original allegations and more about the integrity of institutions, courts, prosecutors, police, and the political class. That is why the next 2 weeks matter. Not only because the court must decide whether to grant another delay, but because the security situation may evolve in ways that either validate or undermine the justification. If tensions cool, critics will argue the delay was unnecessary. If tensions spike, supporters will say the court has no choice but to accommodate the reality of governance under threat. In the background, the broader strategic contest continues. Iran assessing what it learned about Israeli and allied defenses, Israel assessing what it learned about Iranian launch patterns, decoys, and reserve capacity, and Washington assessing how to reconcile victory messaging with a region that still feels volatile. The most sober conclusion is also the least satisfying. Neither side is likely to have achieved a clean final outcome. Missile forces are not defeated the way armies are defeated. They are reduced, disrupted, and deterred until they are rebuilt. And in that kind of contest, the loudest declarations of victory often matter less than the quiet math of production lines, storage depots, and what can be launched on short notice. For Israel, the political and legal story is now inseparable from the security story. A prime minister asking to delay testimony because of classified security and diplomatic reasons is not just a courtroom matter. It is a window into how close the leadership believes the next crisis may be. And for the region, the central uncertainty remains whether the recent pause is the beginning of dash escalation or simply the interval before the next round, when both sides test what they saved, what they rebuilt, and what they are still willing to risk.